Thank you.
Well, good day. I am our Michael Fisher of FearTalk series on my YouTube channel, and today I'm going to be doing a dialogue with a really interesting person, and I'm going to save that for the special moment when we both start talking. But for the first part, what I would like to do is I've been doing these talks for almost 5 years, and I'm really interested to have conversations with interesting people about the topic of fear. And however we examine that topic, we expand it into whatever the conversation and interest is. What I'm really thinking in my idea behind the whole program really was, it's like, I don't think we have really good conversations about fear. We can argue about fear, people can express about fear, and that's one thing, and you can listen. But to actually have a conversation that goes right into and penetrates into the nuancing of the fear problem. The fear problem now I'm speaking of is the fear problem on this planet Earth in a large, large sense. And so that's a bit of what Fear Talks is let's try and do something that's maybe unique, but also has some tradition, may have some discipline to it. Today's sociological aspect of fear will be part of the topic today. And so I want to just do, before I even introduce my guest, and I'm going to let her pronounce her name properly so that we get it really well and I don't mess it up. What intrigued me about speaking with this guest today was a paper in 2021, and it was linking the concept of fearism and racism. So I just like to use this little card as a visual. And you might wonder, why would you put that on a card visually, Michael? I put it on because that is a unique signifier. All of a sudden, we've taken fear in its normal understanding and picture and image, at least in the English language, which I'm restricting this to in a moment. And then when you add this other suffix onto it, the question is, then what becomes of the notion of fear itself? And my interest is in to actually reimagine the notion of fear itself. So I think that'll be part of our conversation today. So we're not just talking about ordinary fears that we recognize, fear of X, Y, Z, and the conversation stays in that domain. So that will be the conversation today. But let's turn to our guest, who is in Turkey this morning, as I understand. Can you just tell us where you are in Turkey and give us your name?
Okay, thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate your interest and reading my paper, actually. So my name is Dilek, and last name Kayaalp. Yeah, I am in Turkey on sabbatical. And I have been working as an associate professor at the University of North Florida since 2021. Before I did my PhD at UBC, University of British Columbia, I lived in Canada for 11 years. If I want to talk about a little bit about my research on fearism and racism, I just want to say that actually your work, Michael, inspired me because when I decided to write a paper on fear and racism, I try to understand, explore the relationship, the interplay between fear and racism. And then I read your work and I was like, wow, this is awesome, because there was this, statement in your work. You were saying that fear is a form of oppression. It is embedded into the structures of the society. So it's, it just gave me it was like an aha moment for me. I was like, yes, actually there is an interplay between fearism and racism. Fearism, just like racism, is a form of oppression. It is structural. it is a process. And then I look at other, theoretical figures, and Sarah Ahmed was one of them. And one of the theoretical tools that I use, one of the concepts from her, saying that so Sarah Ahmed's cultural politics of emotion also helped me a lot. And she was saying that, fear, actually, it's not psychological, which is very interesting to me to realize and to read her work, and then saying that, no, it's not psychological. It is actually a social and cultural practice. So I don't know what you think about that, Michael.
Good start. Well, that was just our 3-minute start to this great conversation. And we're going to back up a little bit, but that start was a really good start.
Yeah.
What I want to start with is locating ourselves, and particularly yourself as a researcher and as a human being who has walked into the research world of study of social phenomenon. But I want to start really by creating what I call an ethical space for us. I'm situated here as an identifiable white male in the North American Western world culture where I was born and raised. I'd like you to locate yourself as you wish to do that. And across, those transects, those transversals, those complications of our relations of power, privilege, domination, what you called the three trinity of oppression in your paper. I would like us to just do a little bit of connecting and creating the ethical space together. So my start of that is to locate myself in that way, and the privileges I have, and also the embedments I have of being oppressed by my own white people and my own white culture and history. But at the same time, I invited you to start this ethical space, this creating of just a moment, right? Of not just in our heads, not just in our space of intellect alone, but really to you bring a voice that you wanted. And I said a quote, a poem, whatever, a prayer you'd like to bring. Would you do that now for us?
Of course. And thank you very much for this, talking about our positionality and how our, social categories affect our perceptions and experiences and our identities. I really appreciated your point. So Antonio Gramsci is a Marxist theorist and theorist. I don't know. Hopefully,
I'll pronounce that. Okay. I'll just pronounce that because that's a very touchy error of possibility. That was theorist, not terrorist.
Exactly. No, not at all. Actually, as you know, he was put into the prison. Okay. Unfortunately, but of course, I value his work, and I just want to bring his quotes, because this quote is, for me, is reflect my work, my research, and what's happening in Florida, actually. Because as I told you, in my message, talking about certain topics is taboo, unfortunately, and you have to be careful. But I don't know. So I think that's why I chose this quote.
Nice. Yeah,
and
I like that.
And the quote is, "To tell the truth is a revolutionary act." And it's a short one, but it's very powerful, and definitely talking about the truth. And someone may ask, what is truth?
Of course.
Right? And there are multiple truths, and it may change from person to person. But telling the truth, for me, from this social justice perspective, my truth and other people's truth, I cannot talk about other marginalized people, but I also see myself as a minority group in the US context. So I just want to talk about my own truth here in this talk.
Great. And would you locate yourself just a little bit in that identity ways that you would like to, and geographically, historically?
Yes. So as I said, I am from Turkey, but also when I was 30 years old, 30, I learned that my ancestors are Kurdish. However, we were assimilated. So my father cannot speak the Kurdish language. I cannot speak the Kurdish language. And even worse, I learned that my roots actually Kurdish when I was 30. It's very late. And when you learn this, you feel angry, why nobody told me this? This is the question that I asked to myself 20 years ago. So now you know my age, but it's okay. And I see myself in the US context as a minoritized woman because I am ethnic minority, religious minority, as well as, language minority. And being a minority woman is not easy, because you have, yes, definitely some advantages, but also you have disadvantages, and you have to struggle with that all the time. And, I will definitely talk about some of the political narratives, how these narratives, target certain individuals, such as immigrants and refugees, and how these kind of narratives affect their lives and experiences.
Absolutely.
So
And so, one of the things in the Fear Talks, I also wanted a really broad, wide, and deep lens. So I basically would say that I'm interested in conversations that are within the secular domain, that are within also the spiritual and religious domain, the sacred, and within and across diversities as much as possible, knowing that I am not interested in some kind of total harmonious narrative, right? That we can unify all under this wonderful picture. But I will say, and this is a little bit of my thesis that I'm
right.
so glad you're picking up on, is my understanding of, if we were to understand fear in a new way, just like if we said, let's understand sex and gender in a new way, let's understand racism in a new way, or ageism, or ethnocentrism, or et cetera, I said, well, if we could understand fear in a new way, the same way, and yes, race is not just about race, it's about racism. Why is the ism added on? Why
Exactly.
is the ism added on? Is to go into a deeper structural context for
Exactly.
like race or like fear, so that we don't end up in one discipline. We don't end up in one perspective, right? From all those different possibilities, even a disciplinary perspective of knowledge, which in the academy would be the psychology of fear, the psychology of emotions. And as you said, Sarah Ahmed's work and others, myself included, and I think definitely your work, as you're putting and playing with fearism in your work, we are recontextualizing. We are actually deconstructing and reconstructing. That's my terms for it, not saying what you're doing. That we're deconstructing, reconstructing the very notion and understanding of fear. Now we're going to get into this talk. I'm going to really want to push. What did the young people in your study that you interviewed in Florida, in Jacksonville, in Florida, for those 2 years, you did an ethnographic study. I will want to ask questions about, did you use the word fearism, for example, with them? Or was it only talk about fear and you came up with fearism yourself after? I'm very interested. And I'm also interested in what your colleagues think about you using the term fearism. And I'll say just the intro is, because a lot of people in the social sciences, sociology, etc., they get really nervous when the psychologization of reality and perspectives and analysis gets sort of reduced down to psychological individualist discourses. And I think that's exactly one of the things I saw in your paper. You do not want to come across as psychologizing the problem of racism, xenophobia, etc., and politics itself, in culture itself. So those are just a few intro remarks. I'll let you just spin off that.
Right. No, these are awesome points, Michael. I really appreciate you and your questions. So I just want to tell you a story.
Let's start.
First of all, I just want to very shortly say that I didn't ask any questions related to fear or fearism to my participants. If you work with young people, you should be clear and sometimes fun, and you shouldn't ask too many maybe long questions. I was just asking very, open-ended questions. So how is it going? How is life? How is schools? Kind of, and then questions. And I did observations in classroom observations, and it was very interesting to me. So it's somehow like ice-breaking, activities kind of thing. They let them to know me and trust me a little bit. And I am a Middle Eastern woman, so I am an insider a little bit, but I cannot talk, for example, Arabic, because there were, some students speaking, or young people speaking Farsi or Arabic. Unfortunately, I can't speak these languages, but still, I think how I look, speaking with an accent, help me a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, related to the, the idea, the concept of fearism, as I said, your work was an inspiration for me, for sure. And the second one, like aha moment for me, I watched a video. The name of the woman, I don't know, have you watched the video? The name of the woman is Amy Cooper.
Don't know.
A woman, a dog walker in Central Park, and walking. And then she's walking, and then another man, an African-American man, is walking with her too, because they are in the same space, Central Park. It's a big park, right? The man is a bird watcher, and then the woman is dog walker. And African-American man eventually decide to record a video, because their conflict turned into a racial conflict, because the woman think that she is actually threatened by this African-American man, and then she says, I am in danger, I am threatened by you, and I will call the police, because the man said, what he said, actually, you can watch the video. Man said, lady or ma'am or something like that, your dog is unleashed, please, you cannot do this. And then she says, I am threatened by you. And she calls the police. And you have to see the video, Michael. You can see that woman is definitely so afraid of that man. And there is nothing to be afraid of, because they are in this very big space, Central Park. And, there are people around them. Anyways, long story short, when I watched this video many times, I realized that, yes, she's afraid of this man, although she's not in danger. What is happening here? When you watch the video again and again from other, African-American man's perspective, you see that how this fear is created or generated by her racism. She learned this racism historically, actually, from this US context. And it's so easy for her to blame this man with, okay, actually, I am in danger, help me, kind of thing. So it's definitely what she learned through time, through history, and how she repeats that racism, and is associated with fearism. So as Sarah Ahmed says, or fear is not a psychological pathology or individual pathology. It's definitely a social and cultural practice. Women learn this, this fear and racism. And the other, I think, important point with Sarah Ahmed's perspective, fear actually is not something irrational. It is definitely rational. It is rational because the woman tries to protect herself. We mainstream people want to protect ourselves from refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers, because they are dangerous. They are criminals. As Trump says, unfortunately, they are, quote unquote, I'm so sorry to say that, I'm just repeating what he said, they are animals, And when you hear this, political narratives over and over again, many years, even in Turkey, you start to think that way. Refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers are criminals. They are, dangerous. It's the same thing, how a white woman think about an African-American man. They are dangerous. It's very interesting, Michael. I just want to add one last thing. I'm also teaching Introduction to Diversity and Introduction to Teaching. And for Introduction to Teaching, my students should do some observations in a public school. So this happened so many times. There are some schools, public schools in downtown, and it's mostly like 99% African-American students. And when I told them that we will go to that school, you can see the fear in their eyes. And I asked them, what's happening? Why are you so fearful? And the answer is, because there are so many African-American students there, and I cannot go there. It is dangerous. Same thing, fearism plus racism work together.
Yeah. In your country growing up, were you exposed to a lot of variety? I don't know the history of Turkey that well, or not.
Yeah, very good question. Actually, it was a multicultural society. However, the assimilation machine works very well. So unfortunately, many people, there are, of course, still Armenians and Kurdish people. Most of them just want to, wanted to immigrate to other countries, because I don't think they feel, safe, especially if you are Kurdish and political, person. It's very difficult to live in Turkey.
Gotcha. Right. Okay. So lots there to unpack. I want to just go back to the word fearism. And I actually want to read a definition that I have in a 2006 paper I wrote. So this is 8 years before the paper you read, which was in 2014 that you used in your study. When you linked fearism and racism, you were looking at my work as well as critiques on representation by Hall et al. And that paper 2014 was, it was called Toward a Theory of Fearism. And it was based on an earlier work, because I'm an educator with a PhD in curriculum and philosophy and education. And when you're talking about teachers and teaching and what happens in our schools, I'm very, that's my territory. I'm very interested. So I wrote this in an educational journal in 2006, and it's really a kind of a post 9/11. I got really awake. I was doing my PhD at UBC.
Wow.
You're saying same university as you.
Yes.
And I was there in 1998 to 2003.
Okay.
And in 2001, 9/11 hit. I had got a grant to do my research on the culture of fear in education.
Wow. That's awesome.
9/11 hits. Okay, I'm going to see what happens in a society when you get an event, a spectacular, right? The spectacular other, and all the narratives and the categorizations, as you talk about, and many of the theorists in your paper. And I will put a link to your paper in the bottom of the video so people can go to your particular paper. But I wanted to just give my 2006 article, which is in a journal of curriculum theorizing. And this was really hard to get published. I've tried publishing my work on fear in the field of education and bringing these ideas forward of giving fear this really important category, right? As a knowledge place and as a location of analysis. And educators are not interested generally. I'm sad to say, after decades of trying, but I finally got one paper in. It's a major paper. I'll send the reference to you at some point. But anyway, it was really on my introduction of what I thought we need in the academy is a fear studies. Just like we have African-American studies, or we have post-colonial studies, or we have some other kind of liberal arts studies, and so on. And I thought fear to me is that important of a category that has potential for expansion. But I came up with a definition of fearism back then, just to give you a feel for it, and certainly feel free to comment. Fearism is the systematic, often unconscious production and perpetration of fear on others for the purpose of obtaining power for abusive control and manipulation of people, other species, and the environment. Fearism as a process and discourse hegemony creates an experience of fear that is normalized and naturalized, whereby the term fear is skewed to mean whatever those in elite power positions who control much of the original fear production want it to mean, and whatever they want to teach it means to others. So you actually, within the structure of this fearism entanglement of social production and reproduction, control of knowledge and power that goes and privilege that goes with that, that what is actually being manipulated is not only the fear as a psychological embodied and social relational experience, as I would say, it's a relational experience. What's also being controlled within fearism, and I don't think you bring this out in your paper, but I could see it as potential next steps if you want to play with it, and we could have more conversations. The actual construction of fear itself as a concept, fear itself, right? Not fear of the other, fear of this, fear of that, but actually of fear itself, the very conceptualization of its relation to reality and to being an organism, being a living organism, is actually manufactured and reproduced by those in elite power positions because they want us to understand fear in a particular way. And it's usually going to be a powerful way that they can control and manipulate. Thus, the short of the term, the intervention here is, so we're not just talking about what's happening in social phenomenon, right? There's fearism structurally in social phenomenon. We're also, I believe you and I are talking about, how do we even step back from that and not just paying attention to what's on the ground and in bodies, that's real and important, but also conceptually. And as a theorist, as a philosophical thinker, I think it behooves us as researchers and others to step back and say, but how is actually fear itself being constructed as a fear management tool, a lens on reality? So this is where, as I finish the definition, I won't go into it, it's quite long, but I basically end up saying fear is not just an emotion. And even to say fear is an emotion is probably already a kind of privatization. And there's a political course and interest in neoliberalism or various ideologies of control to have us put fear into our interior psychological, and therefore they will then both manipulate us and they will help us to deal with our fear their way.
Exactly.
So you can start constructing a social fear management system within a state, by the state, and that gets into our school systems, and that comes into the education of how children, oh, fear is an emotion and a feeling. I can guarantee you that is in the curriculum of every school, implicit or explicit. Fear is a feeling and emotion. It's in the dictionary that way. It's in our encyclopedias of medicine that way, in psychiatry.
Exactly.
We are already, see, this is where I came. I says, oh, I don't trust any of that. You see what I'm saying? So that's the philosophical doubt. And so if you have any comments about that, it's really who gets to construct the fear problem.
Exactly. You know, I think based on what you said, at the end of my paper, I was defining the concept of fear or fearism as imaginary moral crisis. It's imaginary, it's created, as you said, by the dominant group, by the politicians, by the media, by education, by religion, right? by these institutions. Exactly. And, you also talk about that, Stuart Hall is another leading figure for me. And he talks about representational systems, how all these signs, images, created and circulated, and how we internalize all these, images. And eventually we started to believe that other, refugee young people are dangerous, fearsome others. So exactly how they are created. And as you said, when we just stop thinking that it is not, something individual pathology, or just start to think that it is actually social cultural production, as you said, practice, then we see that wait a minute, there's something wrong. We can decode all these codes, all these cultural codes maybe, and then realize what's happening.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go to let's go right back to your participants in that 2-year study. How many participants did you have? Kind of what age range were they? And what kinds of questions were you asking them?
Right.
Obviously you're investigating people who are labeled or identified as migrants by some form of category.
Right. So the age range from 15 to 31, and I talked to 20 young, I will say young people. 31 for some is not young enough, not anymore. But I couldn't ignore that person, because she was one of the key informants for me, and she has lots of experiences. So these people are coming from Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So they have very so many things to say, and some of them were really excited that they were participating in the study.
Nice.
And they talk about some of the experiences they were talking about. They're definitely about racism, and some of them were related to their accents. So I will say linguicism and fearism. So they were definitely suffering from all these isms in their daily lives.
And I'm going to ask you now, after your study and your conclusion of linking that all of those issues of representation, fearism, and racism, and the combinations of power, privilege, and domination that work with that, it's kind of a matrix of domination. Some people have used that term. And one of the things I'm interested in, I was reading and I want to ask you is, if you were to now go back and have a conversation with those participants in any way, let's just pick a few in your mind or imaginary, and you were to take your paper back and actually just break your paper down into really, language that they could handle and concepts they could handle, and you actually at some point used the word fearism with them. So this is like a post reflection. If you use racism, they'd go, yeah, we understand that. If you were to go ethnocentrism, they'd probably understand that. But what happens if you were to use the word fearism in the conversation with them? Do you think it would have, can you imagine it would have some kind of different effect on them that maybe is unpredictable even?
So in a way, you are asking me that if I have another conversation with them, how will I explain the findings and fearism? And
what effect would using the term fearism as a conceptual term, what effect do you think that might have on them? They certainly know about fear and they talked about it. I read some of the quotes. But what if you were to talk about fearism?
Right. Probably I will say that I don't know. It's a perfect question. But probably I will explain them that, politicians, try to focus on other people who look different, who speak different, because they don't want to, or they really don't know how to deal with real problems such as inequalities, poverty, racism. They don't know how to deal with these issues, and sometimes they don't want to deal with these issues. So they just want to focus on you. They choose you as a target, and they just want to point you as the somehow criminalize you and take attention, take, how to say this,
distract.
Exactly. They just want to focus on you because they don't know how to deal with other real life issues.
And I would argue they don't actually know how to deal with fear well.
Exactly. My participants are politicians.
Politicians. As a social, state organization, I'm just saying they know how to manage fear in a society by creating control.
Exactly.
They do know that. They know how to hold people at ransom. They know how to control through structures of fear of punishment, disciplinary, power, and so on. But I would argue they don't actually know how to do good fear management work, fear transformational work, where actually fear becomes a catalyst for positive corrective change, and that changes everybody to get out of this fear-based culture, this fear regime of fearism itself. They don't know how to get out of it. That's my argument.
Exactly, because it works for them.
It works for them too. Yeah. It works.
As you said, to manipulate the public, right?
So here'd be an example again, if you could come from an imaginary point of view. So one of your students, participants, reads your paper and starts to understand this really interesting idea of fearism and racism, and they go up to their school principal. So they're in a hot senior year. They go up to their school principal and they make a meeting, and they say, I just wanted to inform you though that, yeah, there's racism in the school and it's really hard on us marginal people who are labeled as migrants and so on in school. And the principal would nod, yeah, I can see why, yeah, we're working on this problem. And they says, and then the student says, whoa, just wait a minute. I also want to say that fearism is working in this school, not just racism. What would the principal do? What happens?
What do you think?
Thank you. I think what happens is there's a jerk. There's a jerk out of there's a cognitive dissonance. Here to me is why your paper is so important. Because when you just keep talking about racism, even if you're in the resistance of, let's say, the left, of the liberation groups and so on, which I identify, I'm sure you do as well, as a critical social theorist.
Thank you.
But it is in the repetition of that signature itself that racism becomes coded as already a comfortable notion in an odd way. It has a comfort because it doesn't wake us up. It actually puts us into a repetition and a hypnotic trance, actually. It'd be an argument, a mass hypnosis. Oh, we're in this problem. Oh, we got to solve the problem of racism. And all of a sudden your paper comes along, and what do you start in the headline? You don't start your paper with the title, Racism. You start the title of your paper with fearism and racism. This is revolutionary, in my view, of decoding this possible trancing of the familiar. It's a recoding, and then when you hook them together, fearism and racism, just like if this student went up to the principal of the school and said, I think we have a racism problem, but I think the fearism problem may be worse.
Right.
All of a sudden, the whole atmosphere of consciousness, and we're talking about critical consciousness, critical literacy, as educators, as researchers, you want to increase the critical literacy. You don't just want to analyze the way it is. You're going, how can we use this knowledge to intervene to make a better society? And I think by you putting fearism with racism and even privileging fearism at the beginning of your paper, and then you say in the next paper, I want to write on fearism and representation.
Mm.
I want to do more research on that. I think this is the revolutionary code and recoding of all isms. Now I'm going to be very radical by putting fearism before those other isms that we tend to already know about. Fearism is new relatively, so it has at least some new potential. It will be accommodated. People will also go dull to it too over a long period of time, but at least we got something to start with.
Exactly. Yes.
It's
Fearism.
it's recoded. So I'm kind of giving you a theory behind why I think your paper is so revolutionary.
Oh, thank you. But, as I said, I watched this video many times, and then I
Indeed.
see that fear, in my students, in their eyes. And then I read your book, and then I was like, aha, we can talk about fearism now. It exists. It's a concept.
Now, just
it's a social concept.
It is a social construct, exactly. And I would say it's biological, it has a psychological component, it has a social political component. So I kind of am a holistic thinker that way.
Exactly.
And I don't want to make one overprivileged over the
Right.
other. Those are all knowledge domains that I think a good holistic integral plan and a good thinking and a good intervention ought to, okay, there's a neurobiology of fear. Yeah, okay. There's a but no discourse is going to control the conversation here. And that's why I start with fear. The study of fear is a transdisciplinary adventure.
Exactly.
And that's how I started my career in 1989. I made it transdisciplinary so I would not get into privileging those particular domains. Now, I want to say then I think it's important for you. I don't know if you know the literature, because I know you're just sort of beginning to get into the fearism, but because I'm an expert for a long time on the idea of where fearism came from and why, there right now is a literature of 30 plus researchers in published papers in migration studies who use
I'm sorry,
in migration studies.
Okay.
Just that overall, in all the aspects of migration studies, and of course that's really taken off in the last 10, 15 years, migration studies. Right. And they are using, I can list 30 papers or more of researchers using the concept of fearism. It's the most popular of all the vocabulary I've created of this critical literacy around fear. Fearism is the only one that's been picked up in the academy and is being used by researchers, and it's in migration studies. So your paper falls within that category, right? And I found out the source of why. There was a researcher in education. His name is Michelinas, is his last name. Can't think of his first one. No, it's Michelinas Zembilas. From Cyprus, and he started citing my first paper that I was reading that definition of fearism from. Right. He found it in education. He published it, and because he was a bit into working with migrants and conflicts in Syria, Greece, all those kinds of areas, huge conflicts in his classroom, he brought the concept of fearism in 2008.
2008, okay.
And he published that in a paper. And the migration studies people have been republishing that definition from his paper for the last 15 years.
That's cool.
I wrote a paper on that and said, I'm really glad you people are publishing and reusing the idea of fearism, but you need to go back to my original source because you're missing half of the definition. So they're doing secondary citing as scholars. And they've missed some of the really deep stuff that we've been talking about today. This much deeper structure of the problem of fearism. And that idea of the normalization of fear within the fearism coding and structure, that oppression of fearism. When fear becomes normalized, what happens is you don't care about the definition of fear anymore because it's just normalized. You don't need to keep reconstructing and deconstructing it because it's getting normalized. And what ends up happening is you actually forget it's going on. And this is what happened to racism. It got so normalized in certain places, you can't even sort of recognize it in the conversation or discourse. I mean, you can if you do dig in it, but for the most of the population, it becomes invisible. So we call this invisibilization. So I want to let you know, Fearism is taking off within that community of discourse to some degree.
Yes.
Your paper pushed it by putting Fearism before racism.
It is visible.
It is very visible.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Wow.
so it sort of comes down.
Great analysis.
Thank you. And so what it comes down to, just in another simple language, what I was trying to get to was, I wanted to signify way back, and you can see this paper I wrote.
Yes. Defining fear.
So these little marks on fear,
right?
Those are marks that tell us you can no longer just talk about fear and it be normalized. So I use that as a coding in my writing. And I'll mark it with that code. And if I don't use the marks, I'm basically talking about how we normally understand fear.
Right.
But the moment I put the marks on it in my text, I tell people I am now referring to the fear construct and imaginary outside of the normal hegemony of the discourse of oppression. In other words, outside of fearism itself in its talking form. And so I feel like you can see I'm trying to create new ways to talk about what is so familiar.
Exactly.
And that is so important to be able to do. So that's just another technique. I've used fearism, adding the ISM, and then I've also used the scare marks to say, no, that term is now under deconstruction, because we cannot, I start with the assumption we have to put a philosophy of doubt into our investigation, that we know as much about fear as we think we do.
Exactly. And while talking with you, Michael, I'm just thinking about another maybe manuscript, maybe, we can publish together. What about writing something? It's very interesting because, as you said, there are so many research about racism, right? About sexuality, etc. What about, how fearism looks like in classrooms, right? Because you said, what would be the answer of the principal if a student, ask this question or say, hey, there is fearism in a school?
Yeah.
It's very interesting, actually.
It is.
How it works.
And if you were to ask teachers right in a school, you could actually do a quick survey.
Exactly.
There's research on fearism. We wondered what you know as a teacher about fearism. If a student asked, and the teacher would likely say, oh, I know about their fears and I've heard about their fears. I'm willing to listen to their fears. And you see, as a researcher, as a critic like yourself, we'd say, whoa. That's like saying you want to talk about race, but you don't want to talk about racism at the structural, deep, embedded level where it actually is mostly unconscious.
Exactly.
So you and I coming across two different perspectives. You identifying as a woman of color, marginalized group. I representing sort of the dominant group, at least in North America. And I said this morning, what's amazing is I can actually have a conversation with you in a friendly way. And it's not just about being friendly. It's actually the cue, the bridge was we had a concept in common, which was called fearism. And we could come at these oppositional places and locations, even if we were politically different, because we actually both were interested in fearism. This is kind of my intuition that told me this is worth studying fear, because in many ways, if we could remake our relationship with fear, be re-educated in fear. And I mean in an open way. No, there's no dogmatism about this is the way fearism, it has to be. No, it's still open for conversation. It's under deconstruction. It's under reconstruction. Always will be, like any good education process. So I'm not coming dogmatically. I don't see you doing that. But what happens is we could have come and said, well, let's talk about love. And brought our differences, right, across this large gap, political identity, politics, etc. But we came across and said, well, we want to talk about fear. So I'm saying fear is a powerful bridge.
Exactly.
To unify the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
Race, sexuality differences, so the politics of all those differences, as useful as those are to a point, is my place, until you can find a common ground that doesn't exacerbate the differences and shifting hierarchies of privilege that might go with that. You know, it's a very fluid, as Foucault would say, power moves like this, victim, oppressor, victim, oppressor. And we've seen that in revolutions throughout history. So-called better turns out to be not so better.
But yeah, definitely, I agree with you. I appreciate your explanations and analysis. Also, I'm thinking that yes, definitely there is some kind of common point. But also, if I ask you, what about your experiences of fearism, Michael? Probably your experiences with fearism will be different than mine. Yeah, which is an interesting twist.
Yeah, I think they are, and yet there's a lot of common, I think a lot of common ground too. Because as soon as you go to something like Sarah Mudd's work and you realize that fear is a social, structural, relational event.
Exactly.
All of us have had experiences, and I use the language of, I have experiences, so I'm sharing this with you, if you want to share too. I have experiences where people who are loving, when the fear rises to a certain degree, that fear pulls that love apart and breaks it and can shatter it and can turn into betrayal, revenge, violence, all the repetitions of the post-traumatic condition. We are in that, to me, on a collective level in this planet. We are in it in certain personal relationships. And then those take place and attach to ethnocentric differences, gender differences, race differences. So the actual structure, the phenomenon of this breaking between love and fear as these really powerful meta motivations, I call them, and not just psychological, right? That they have that a power. And I don't think there's a human being around that doesn't know that experience. Of when love gets damaged by people no longer trusting. We're now in a fear-based reaction. We now we enemy make, we do all kinds of things, or we basically disappear you because you're different than me and a threat to me. So you go back to the video of threat, right? The imagined and constructed threat and the real threat. It's not like they're all separate, but they're in this mess, right? Of the real, the imagined, the discursive, the constructed. And that's what we're attempting, a much more complex conversation on fear. That's what Fear Talks is about. How is this for you today as we end here? Maybe just give a little summary of what it was like for you in this conversation.
I love it. I love it because I learn a lot from you. It is inspirational. And as I said, now I'm thinking about using this concept more often because I talked and wrote a lot about racism, but not many, only one paper on fearism. And I think it's a very sexy term. And as you said, let's make it visible.
Yeah, and just love to engage with young people. I would love to hear what they think about some of these ideas and the concept of fearism. Thanks very much today for joining me.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
We may do again sometime. Keep in touch.
Definitely.
All the best.
Yes, definitely.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.